So this lecture is about the musical Showboat. Should be enjoyable. We'll see.
Hey, here comes the showboat. Welcome back to class. That's what we're going to talk about today is America's first musical. Really constructed as a musical. Showboat. The Cotton Blossom. Captain Andy's Floating Show. In November of 1926, Florenz Ziegfeld called his secretary Goldie into his office to take a letter. He said, "Last night I heard the first act of The Showboat, and Jerome Kern's music was amazing. This is the best musical comedy I have ever been fortunate to get a hold of. This show is the opportunity of my lifetime." Well, he had impeccable taste, for sure. The history of the American musical theater is divided quite simply into two eras. Everything before Showboat and everything after Showboat. Oh, listen, sister, I love my Mr. Man, and you can't understand until I tell you a little more. It was composer Jerome Kern who first read Edna Ferber's novel about a Mississippi showboat, and he teamed with a 31-year-old writer, Oscar Hammerstein, to turn her epic story into a musical. They wrote most of the songs of the first act and brought them to Florenz Ziegfeld. Who else would you bring them to? He was a god. He was the greatest producer of his time. He was the only man that they felt would have the vision and the power and the influence to do it. Ziegfeld at once leapt to it. Showboat must have been terrifying for him because everything he'd done up until then was spectacle and beautiful and funny. And this was a real story. I'm sure he loved doing it, but I know it must have been terrifying to do something so new. To begin with, it was a sad story. Not funny. Ziegfeld said, "We can't do a musical with all this sadness." He was afraid people would not like what he was doing because they would expect a follies, laughter, beautiful girls, humor, dance, and spectacle. It was seismic, that's for sure. The earth shook. First of all, it took a serious topic on race. Miscegenation. We don't do that now, but there was a time when a white man and a black woman could not marry, legally could not marry. And you would be put in jail. You might even be killed for it. So this was in this musical. Lights, costumes, dancing, music was a topic that was frightening at the time, shocking even. It had in the beginning, in the first act, leading characters, over 8 leading characters, all interrelating, talking, and not singing. An incredible, complex, political plot. Let me see if I can give you some of the dialogue.
How's that? Case of a Negro woman married to a white man. A criminal offense in this state. Gilly Dozier, my information says you were born in Mississippi. Your pop was white, your mammy black. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
You two better get your things and come along with me.
Frightening. Frightening even now to have a sheriff say that to you. But back then, who knew where he was taking them, where they were going? Further on in the story, we find out they did not make out so well. I'm not going to give you the ending. You're going to have to find out, if you don't know Showboat, how the story goes. Now, Jerome Kern is quoted as saying, "I think that before we opened, Ziegfeld expected it would be a pretty big bore. And he thought that all that story stuff would just be cut out, and what would remain would be the pretty costumes and the tunes and the comedian. But I wanted to keep the spirit of Miss Edna's book. It was a sprawling kind of novel, but the one focal influence I could find was the river. So I decided to use the Mississippi as its central theme. Now, here's a song everyone should know, and certainly anyone who's a bass or a baritone would want to sing.
There's an old man called Mississippi. That's the old man that I want to be. What does he care if the world's got trouble? What does he care if the land ain't Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. He don't plant taters, he don't plant cotton, and them that plants 'em is soon forgotten. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain. Tote that barge and lift that bale, get a little drunk, and your land's in jail. I get weary and sick of trying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying.
Beautiful. But it was also the through line for a serious musical, a musical that had a story. What Oscar Hammerstein did primarily was to take bits and pieces of different things. He married European opera, an American musical comedy tradition, and Showboat is the apotheosis of that, in which you tell a story, but unlike European operetta, a story that was real, or had realism in it. And I think one of the reasons Showboat turned out so well was Jerome Kern knew what Hammerstein wanted, and he was just as interested in doing it. The composer saw in the show something he wanted to set to music. It was not a producer's idea of a big show or a librettist's idea of a good story. It was a composer's idea of good music. Kern must have seen something in the setting of Showboat, all the possibility of the music that could be played. He quoted everything from Stephen Foster to the present of the time of the show, 1927, tracing the history of popular American theater. This is my bill. I used to dream that I was covered with perfect lover. Someday I knew I'd recognize him if ever he came round my way. I always used to fancy that he'd be one of the kind I never met, with a giant brain and a noble head, like the heroes all in the books I read. But along came Bill, who's not the type at all. You'd meet him on the street and never notice him. His form and face, his manly grace, are not the kind that you would find in a tattoo. Oh, I can't explain. It's surely not his brain that makes me thrill. I love him because he's wonderful, because he's just my Bill. He can. That's one of the most famous songs and often sung in auditions for women from the show. Let me see. Showboat docked. I'm being clever. Showboat docked in New York on December 27th, 1927, at the stunning New Ziegfeld Theater. The producer gave his audience everything his name had stood for over 2 decades. But this time, there was a story. An American story. And the Broadway musical, the folk musical, had reached its first milestone. Hammerstein, who directed it, did something revolutionary. He didn't really do curtain calls. He took away the curtain calls. When the show opened and the curtain went down and no one came out to bow, there was absolute silence. And Ziegfeld said, well, now I've really done it. In the original production, without curtain calls, what did the audience do? How did they know how to react? They applauded politely, they just got up and left and went right on out into the night. Ziegfeld was sure he had a failure until the following morning reviews came out. Suddenly, the musical could say something with an integrity that it hadn't quite said before. Thanks to Kern and Hammerstein, the performers and designers, but mostly thanks to Ziegfeld, who made it possible and popular. He already had an audience base. The problem is, Showboat was a hard act to follow. As a producer, Ziegfeld had guided the American Broadway musical to maturity, but the triumph of Showboat could not be repeated. Over the course of the 1920s, the songwriters Ziegfeld hired and the performers he engaged would become far more powerful than Ziegfeld himself. Their celebrity and popularity, trumpeted by technology in this new media age, back then, would extend well beyond the confines of the theater district and would bring the Broadway musical to every corner of the nation. Now, sadly, we lacked for Broadway musicals. So the next section of our course, we will be talking about people, personalities, the development of American music, and we won't see another book musical again for several decades. I'd like you to take another look at my course. Be sure that you check in, do all the quizzes, talk to me in the discussion section, do your assignments. If you have any questions, please contact me at